Unit 5-4, 1920s to 1940s, Lesson 7. The essential question for 5-4.7 is, what were the social and political impacts of World War II on the American home front and the world? And when it talks about the home front, it's just talking about what happened at home. The objectives. What you should know by the end of this video is explain the social impacts of World War II, explain the role women had during World War II, explain the role African Americans had during World War II, explain Japanese internment camps, and describe the new boundaries after World War II. The social impacts of World War II. World War II had a major social impact on the United States that would have a long-term political effect. The nation came together as each American was encouraged to do your part in the war effort. Each and every American was called upon to conserve scarce materials, which means not enough materials, by contributing to scrap metal drives and planting victory gardens. However, voluntary conservation was not enough, and Americans were required to use ration booklets. And these booklets controlled distribution of items, which means you had this booklet, and in there was like something similar to coupons where you would take it and use it to get your bread for the week or get whatever allotment you were able to get for that week. The economy was finally pulled out of the depression by the war effort as everyone went to work to help win the war. Recap. Americans rallied together to do their part in the war effort. They contributed to scrap metal drives, planting victory gardens, and used ration booklets. Women during World War II. Women as homemakers, and homemakers meant they worked from home, were responsible for rationing and victory gardens. More women also began to work outside the home in greater numbers. They took the place of husbands, sons, and brothers in factories and built airplanes, trucks, and ships. Although women faced discrimination, Rosie the Riveter became an icon of the period, and Rosie the Riveter is actually this woman right here. Women were expected to return home when the war ended and the soldiers returned to their jobs. So when the soldiers returned, the women returned home. Despite hardships such as discrimination and lack of childcare, many women missed the workplace, and this wartime experience helped lay the foundation of women's movement in 1960s. Recap. Women helped with rationing victory gardens and went to work in factories while men went off to war. Role of African Americans. African Americans demanded the right to wartime jobs, and President Roosevelt ordered that they be given the opportunity. Many more African Americans moved to cities in the North and on the Pacific coast to work in wartime industries. African Americans made some strides in the military during the war, such as the Tuskegee Airmen. However, they served in segregated units, which means they were separated from whites, as was the experience in previous wars, and were often assigned duties of lesser importance because of racial prejudice that often led those in power to doubt in their capabilities. The role played by African American soldiers in the war and the treatment by whites on the home front during and after the war prompted President Truman to order that the armies be desegregated after World War II. This would be the cause. This is the effects. The experiences of African Americans proving themselves by serving their countries at home and abroad, called the Double Victory, helped lay the foundation of the Civil Rights Movement of 1960. This is the cause. This is the effect. This also has something to do with the DBQ and our Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is kind of what made them realize that, oh, African Americans can also do what whites do. They helped protect us in the war. So now they've gotten a bit of honor through the eyes of the whites. Or maybe segregating things is not the right move to make. Recap. African Americans worked in wartime factories during the war and also joined the military in segregated units, most notably the Tuskegee Airmen. Because of their role in the home front and in the war, President Truman ordered the Army to be desegregated. Japanese internment camps. Japanese Americans faced the most extreme discrimination. Following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 110,000 Japanese Americans were moved to internment camps in the western deserts of the United States, made to leave their homes and businesses with little warning or compensation for their losses of possessions and livelihood. They were imprisoned behind barbed wire fences without the right to a trial and without proof that they were disloyal. Nonetheless, Japanese Americans continued to be loyal to the United States. Some of them served with distinction in the military units in the European theater. So basically, the United States thought that because the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, that all Japanese people were loyal to Japan, so they put them all in internment camps, these little, camps that they couldn't get in or out of. They were ripped from their homes. They couldn't take their possessions, or they could take only very little of their possessions. They lost their homes, their businesses, because they weren't there to use them. And they had no trial, which is against the Bill of Rights. They had no proof that they were disloyal, but they still thought that they were gonna turn on America. However, despite all of this negativity towards Japanese Americans, there were still some who served in the military. Recap. Japanese Americans were moved to internment camps. Recap. Japanese Americans were moved to internment camps in the western desert. Some served in the military units during the war. New boundaries after World War II. As the result of the war, political boundaries of some nation states were changed and some governments were altered. The United States established a democracy in occupied Japan. Germany was divided into 4 zones occupied by the 4 Allied powers. Soon the United States, Great Britain, and France united their zones to create a democratic government, which is what later is known as West Germany. The Soviet Union established a communist government in East Germany. Berlin, the former capital of Germany, was similarly divided although it was located entirely within the Soviet Union zone. So you can see on the map right here, Berlin is right here. This right here in the brown is the USSR, which is all communist. Then if you look at the other 3, this would be Britain and France and then the United States. This is all democratic government. The Soviet Union also set up puppet regiments in the Eastern European nations that they had liberated from Germany occupation. Although the United States emerged from the war as a dominant world power, it will soon find itself in confrontation with its World War II ally, the Soviet Union. The Cold War, which will be 5-5 unit, has its roots in differences in wartime priorities between the United States, Great Britain, and France, and the Soviet Union. Recap. Germany was split into the 4 Allied powers, Britain, France, US, and the USSR. West Germany became democratic and East Germany communist. Japan became a democracy due to US occupation.